Okay, so as I say, 50 plus years. Can you hear me if I stand away?
Yeah, not very well.
Right.
No, there's a slide in front of you, so you can see the slides.
See through my head.
Yeah.
Okay. I worked in various aspects of UK public transport, British Rail, London Transport, bits of what became the National Bus Company. Out at the other end is one of the privatised units of former National Bus Company subsidiaries, and I went back to London Transport in 1991 to head up their crusade. In many ways, it was certainly my crusade of making the whole system more accessible and more user-friendly. I retired early from what had become TfL in 2003 and went off to do various consultancy projects. I did a significant amount of work for the EU, in which I should tell you I'm a great believer. And we helped quite a lot of places in the accession countries coming in from the former communist bloc, where I have to say public transport was generally pretty impressive because so few people had cars. And it does show you, if so few people have cars, not only does public transport have to be good, but it really can be. It's amazing. So I was helping various Polish, Czech, Hungarian, you name it, cities to get EU money to invest in largely fixed track and certainly electric public transport. And it's quite key that they are many years ahead of us. Even the Great London, which has a massive, largely electrified suburban railway network, the Underground, the Overground, the DLR, the Tram. As you probably know, local journeys in London are dominated by bus traffic, and until recently, those were almost all diesel buses. So actually the quantum of, let's say, zero-emission public transport in London a couple of years ago was only about 22%. If you go to Riga in Latvia, it's 82% because there's a massive tramway and an equally massive trolleybus network, and there's hardly a diesel bus to be seen. So that's a former communist country, but it's way ahead of this great westernised democracy. I have had a lifelong interest in and advocacy for electric public transport, and I should probably tell you that that was instilled into me when, more than 60 years ago now, staggering, I went as a school exchange student to the Netherlands. I stayed with a very nice family way up in the north in Friesland, near Groningen, and the treat for the whole family, while the English boy was staying, was to go to Amsterdam for the weekend. And although there was a pretty large family car on the drive, we went by train, and we travelled around Amsterdam on foot, by tram, etc. And it just struck me, these things, trams, I had seen them. I'd probably been to Blackpool, I'd certainly been to Glasgow because we had relatives there, etc., etc. But there was something that struck me straight away about Amsterdam, and it still does, because it's a fascinating city. The mobility of the population is huge. People are almost never sitting or standing still in Amsterdam, apart from the occasional brown cafe. And it's aided by a significantly good public transport system, and again, very low car use. And it struck me then that there was no traffic congestion in Amsterdam, yet a smaller, much smaller city I was familiar with, because although I was born in London, I grew up in the West Country, and the traffic in Bath in the early 1960s was manic, and it's not improved one iota. They need trams. A year later, I did a school exchange visit to the far northwestern corner of Germany, to a city called Leer, Ostfriesland, and the same thing happened there. Although there was a family car, the treat, weekend away with the English boy, was to Bremen, another big tramway city, then in the early process of modernisation. And those images are kind of engraved in my brain and have been ever since. And it's really interesting how we got these things wrong. Oh, sorry, this is a piece of nonsense. This is just my logo. That's not supposed to be in there. Let's get rid of that. Right, so LRTA. I have been a member of the LRTA, I think, for more than 50 years. I was eventually persuaded in 2006 to join the council of the organisation. I became its chairman a few years later, gave that up a couple of years ago. What's really interesting about the LRTA, I beg your pardon, let's try and get the slide, will it stay?
Yeah.
Yes. What's really interesting about the LRTA is that it was created in 1937 largely to try and stop London Transport removing trams from the great city. It failed because London Transport was pretty determined. They were absolutely manic about getting rid of trams, as most of the nation was, and the mistake wasn't really realised until well into the 1960s. But we kept on and gradually became an international organisation, and of course from about 1990 onwards, even in the UK, we were able to be quite smart about this and say, told you so, you should never have got rid of the trams in the first place. How can we help? And we do. Not only as an advocacy body, but we do some campaigning, and of course research, and people like me to roll around and make speeches. So nowadays I'm one of the organisation's vice presidents. So what can trams do? I think the single most important thing, and in fact it's at the bottom of this slide, is that if you have a fixed track public transport system, you will have a far better chance of generating interest of one kind or another, inward investment, creation of jobs, etc., etc. You'll never ever be able to do that with an all-bus system. Many have tried, all have failed. Urban public transport actually provides loads of jobs itself, about 13 million jobs worldwide. Any investment in public transport creates as many jobs as investment in roads, and increasingly more than investment in roads. A German study showed that for every euro you invest in public transport, you get 5 to 5.30 of added economic value. And of course, tramways can create unique opportunities to make cities more sustainable and much pleasanter places to live. Do you know Milton Keynes? Now, Milton Keynes was developed as the city of the future for the car. It's relatively low density, which is fundamentally a mistake. We know that now. And of course, it's laid out for the car. It's the devil's own job to try and provide any kind of bus service. So bus use in Milton Keynes is maybe 2 or 3% of the total modal split, which is appalling. And we've made all those mistakes and carried on making them. So we gave up the most sensible form of urban public transport known to man, and we have really, in this country, followed the American model from about the 1920s onwards. We had people like Mrs. Thatcher referring to the great car economy. We once had one of the biggest motorway builders in the world, Ernest Marples, as our Minister of Transport, etc., etc. We never really looked to Europe. Sadly, we've stopped doing that even now, but we could have learned so much from the Austrians, Belgians, Dutch, Germans and the Swiss. Now, not everyone did what they did, and the French certainly were more like us. They had 3 tramway systems left by the 1960s, one in the north in Lille, which was largely based on 2 reserve track lines on boulevards built in the early 1900s. In Marseille, where they had a tunnel into the city centre, and it made sense to run trams in that. And the most interesting one in many ways was Saint-Étienne, the coal fields to the south of Lyon. Massive public transport use, and one main line north to south, tram number 4. They kept on looking, and they kept on realising they could not carry that number of people with buses. They'd just be stuck line to line, nose to tail, all the way through the relatively narrow streets of the city. From those 3 examples, in the early to mid-1970s, the French government started to say to cities, "Bah, you've got a problem. And it's your problem, but we're from government, we're here to help. What you need to do is look very carefully at traffic congestion. Why have you got it? How can you get rid of it?" And there was a particular transport minister who invited the 11 largest towns and cities in the country to come and talk to him about investing in trams, and almost no one turned up. Like us, they were still politically and certainly locally stuck with the view that trams are old-fashioned, they get in the way of cars, we're not having those back. But one place that actually wasn't on the list of 11, not in the northwest of the country, went to the transport minister, and the rest, as they say, is history. Nantes invested in its first tram line, opened in 1984, and now you've got 3 lines in Nantes, and a 4th one is planned. And of course, like a rash, it's covered the rest of the country. So 30 odd years worth of investment has led to 28 systems. The very interesting thing that happened in France, because it was just at the point where people like me were saying we really ought to be making public transport accessible. Never mind wheelchair users, just think of a majority almost everywhere. The majority of public transport use is female, shopping, with small kids, and bags from Tesco's. So why have steps in the doorways of your vehicles? That's really not going to help. So you need to get rid of those, hence the low floor concept, and that really took hold from the second new system in France in Grenoble. I have to say that Nantes then very quickly extended its original high floor trams to have a low floor centre section so that accessibility was provided. There was a nervousness about gaps, both vertical and horizontal, so these first low floor trams, arguably the first true low floor trams in the world, Geneva will tell you they had some, but it's a rather Swiss description of low floor. And so they had these pallets which automatically extended at the doorways. Bit of a nuisance because you've got an extra piece of kit. And pretty quickly it was realised that you can. Railed vehicles are wonderful because of course they provide the best possible interface with a stock platform, and it doesn't move if you've laid the track correctly, etc., etc. So you didn't really need moving pallets, and that's the kind of step and gap you get on any modern tramway. We've got them here in the UK as well, maybe about 40 millimetres either way. That generally less than 25 on the vertical. Come on, Arrow, I'm pressing you. Should I aim it at anything?
No, should be next. Oh, hand. So you've hit me. Don't wait. That's it. Go on. No, try that. Yeah.
Right, okay. So, very brief description of what goes on in France, because I think this is absolutely the model that we should by now have been following, and we haven't. In all urban areas, there is a requirement to prepare a thing called the PDU, Plan de Déplacement Urbain. This is going back to the 1970s, and the ministry saying, you've got a problem with congestion, what are you going to do about it? Movement, traffic, involving business was a key part of this in the very early stage. And once all that consultation has gone on and you've set out the things that you could do, you will get approval. It's rather like our compulsory purchase orders in the form of a DUP, Déclaration d'utilité publique, very French. But this, of course, is saying, this is the plan, this is how we're going to achieve it. So a TCSP, Transport en Commun sur site propre, basically a public transport system on its own tracks. In 99.9 cases in France, that's been trams. There have been a couple of tearful, very tearful experiments with rubber-tired single guide rail. They're not trams really, and they failed, and that kind of thing will always fail. So interestingly, state subvention, which was pretty big in the early days, has reduced and reduced and reduced because, very sensibly, the French have a system of raising money locally. The Versement Transport, crudely, is a payroll tax. So any employers employing, I think nowadays, more than 6 people in the given transport authority area will pay. And it can be a maximum of 2.6. Generally, it's much lower than that. It's ramped up to allow for expensive periods of constructing a line, and then it comes down again. I was involved in some of the early discussions about Line 2 in Nantes, where the Versement had obviously been introduced. And it had gone, the mayor was telling me, it had gone from absolutely total opposition in the business community, as you would expect. You know, we're here to make money, this is not, we're against it. To the point where, in consultation for Line 2, business was all for it. Because what they discovered from the opening of Line 1 was that they could virtually close all their car parks. You know, they weren't going to need to provide expensive land for their staff to park on because they were coming by tram, etc., etc. So I think it's very important, and we're not grown up enough about this in the UK, to get these local funding methods in and get local business involved. It's their money. Let's have them involved in how we spend it. Mayors, again, we're very lukewarm about this, aren't we? We were batty enough to have referendums on mayors as well as on leaving the EU. It's complete basket case ridiculous stupidity. How can you say to people, you must vote, do you want to have a mayor or not? Excuse me, you should be saying, we're going to introduce a mayor. The good news is you'll be voting him or her into office and out again if you don't like what they do. So we need to learn from that too. But the mayor is very important, because especially in France, the mayors have been the complete catalyst to all of this. They know everyone, and they are known by everyone, particularly business, and of course they're able to get things done. As we've seen, frankly, with the metro mayors in the UK. Government doesn't necessarily like them, because they might come from the other party, but that's tough. The Grand Projet approach, this is very French. I'm not advocating that we should always do this, but it's very, very key that if you look at the most French cities with modern tramways, they have done a very impressive job of inserting it into their existing built environment. They've spent a lot more money than necessarily could be attributed to the tramway to achieve that, the sort of facade to facade renewal of main streets. They've always achieved 100% priority for the tramway. That is not to say that there aren't sections in the street where trams are in mixed traffic, but they still have total priority. And they've done a pretty good job of ensuring that the contracting arrangements work successfully. We, on the other hand, have been saddled by the wretched PFI, Private Finance Initiative, which is very intelligent because it's the government, which is the state, saying we are going to get the private sector to take risk. Of course you can do that, you know. You can say to me, Andrew, I want you to take a risk on something or other, and I'll look at it and I'll go, well, you know, that might not work. I'll add 25% to that. No, actually I won't. I'll probably add 50% to that. You cannot transfer risk to the private sector. Stop it. Public authorities are there to do things for the public good. That's where the risk should lie. By all means, contract out everything, yeah, except the risk. Contract out the operation. We've learnt a lot from that. Total integration is the other thing that is hugely important. Nottingham, we have an excellent modern tramway in Nottingham, and when it started, one of the shareholders in the PFI that was running the tramway was Nottingham City Transport, the largest bus company in the city. 3-4 years later, when it was decided to extend the tramway, government insisted on going for a completely new beauty parade. So you end up by competitive tendering with a different outfit, no longer including Nottingham City Transport. I think it was stupid, but I don't blame them. They took the tramway off their bus map because it's no longer theirs. You know, I mean, this is nonsense. It's nonsense on stilts, but we do it. You must totally integrate all forms of public transport. You must have one ticket. If I'm going to use a car, which I'm proud to say now is an electric one, I only need one key. I don't have 5 different keys depending on whether I'm going to go into Camberley, near where I live, or to Reading, or to Basingstoke. No, it's one key. And if you don't have one key for all forms of public transport, you might as well go home now. Now, a few examples of state of the art. This is the sort of thing that the French have achieved. This is Nantes, actually on line 2 in Nantes, and you have this fabulous roundabout. The trams go straight through the middle, all the traffic has to stop, total priority. There's a fountain which goes up to great height, except when a tram is coming through, and it's just a little dribble, but it looks great. Notice, and I keep coming back to this, you have to do something with the buses as well. In Nantes they converted to gas, so this is an articulated gas bus. The quality of the bus offer in Nantes improved to the level of the tram. And it showed, because bus passenger numbers increased. In fact, in every French city where there's a modern tramway, despite the fact that that modern tramway has replaced, obviously, what were the busiest in terms of passenger numbers bus routes, bus passenger numbers have still gone up because it's all one system, it's integrated, buses feed to trams, interchange is sensible. New housing. We struggle. I mean, where I live, there's lots and lots of former military land near Aldershot, and almost all of it is being converted to new housing estates, where everyone will have to have a car. Because in deregulated, privatised Britain, though it's supposed to be changing with Boris's bus back better, if you've read it, not much confidence of that happening. So at the moment, it's up to Stagecoach, the largest of the local bus companies, privately owned. Why should it spend its money providing buses to somewhere where they're not going to make any money? Whereas here, on line 2 in Nantes, new residential areas were created and the tram was built first. So as people move into the houses and flats and apartments, they don't need a car because there's a tram every 4 minutes. Learn the lessons. And it looks pretty good, you know, the track's in grass, it's easy to cross, it's safe, it's good for your kids, absolutely wonderful. Can you see any cars there? Gosh. The other great thing about trams is that it's almost as if they never went away. Grenoble was a tramway city until the 1950s, and this was one of the main old tram routes in Grenoble. And now they're back, and it's as if they never went. It's a pedestrian area. You can see a few cars because they're there for deliveries and disabled parking, etc. But what dominates the scene in this city is the tram. And it's not necessarily a small vehicle. It's the original Nantes vehicles are 26 metres long, and two of them side by side fills a street. But it's a statement of the obvious. The problem, and you should never do this until your population gets to at least 4 million, underground systems, you don't know where they are. You know, we've spent years in London conning the public by saying you can go from Leicester Square to Covent Garden on the Piccadilly line. It's the shortest distance between two stations in the city. It's 0.6 of a mile. It's always quicker to walk. But people don't realise that. But if you're public transport, not only is it hidden away, but you've got to get to it. You've got to get 30 feet, or if it's overhead, you've got to get up. Don't do it. Trams belong in the streets with the people. The cars don't. Strasbourg was a cause célèbre because the mayor of Strasbourg, Catherine Trautmann, announced she was going to build a tramway on the back of what had happened in Nantes and Grenoble, and was starting in Paris. And her party, all her supporters said, "You're mad, Catherine, you'll never get elected, because what you're saying is you're going to take away the cars and put in trams." She was elected 5 times in a row. She served the maximum allowed under the law. She then became a minister in the French government. One of her great visual statements is this, if you know it, it's On de Fer, where the main north, south and east-west tram lines cross in Strasbourg. It is completely and utterly useless as a shelter. But that's not what it is it? It's a kind of vision statement. It's saying, hey, you know, we're here. This is my city, this is my tram, this is my stop. And that picture, I think, probably appeared on about 90% of UK public transport plans in the 1990s. Grass track. I come back to this because it's so good. It's a green wave, isn't it? You know, we've all got green environment, it's friendly, zero emissions, and there's lots and lots of this. And the track engineers will tell you they like it because the rails last about an extra 5 years. You get a slightly springier take to them. Again, insertion into Strasbourg is quite a historic city, as you may know. And they've done a really excellent job. They actually took away a nasty asphalt street here, full of cars and pollution, and they relaid the sort of 1890s, early 1900s granite sets. And it looks fabulous. And it's not difficult to cycle on. Interchange, huge lesson here for the UK. My God, do you know Reading? Now in Reading, we, the people, put £850 million of our money into Reading having a new station. The old station in Reading, the buses stop right outside. With the new station, they're all tucked away in side streets, and there's a massive empty space, it's ghastly, outside Reading station, which should have been a public transport hub. Why haven't we shot all the councillors who did that in Reading? Because we bloody well should. Interchange needs to be simple. You see here a tram on the right and a bus on the left. Passenger gets off the bus, crosses the platform onto the tram. And that probably happens about every 5 or 10 minutes. All day long, it's reliable and it works. And people don't notice. Follow the average Swiss to work. And you will sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, my God, you got on a bus, then you got on a tram, then a train, then another tram, and finally you're walking into work. All these changes, and they'll look at you and say, what changes? They don't actually know it's happening. Again, here you've got, it's almost unbelievable that trams used to be there on that bridge, and they're back, and they look as though they've never gone away. So, Bordeaux. Cause célèbre because Alain Juppé, former Prime Minister, you may know the name, became the mayor of Bordeaux. He wanted a tramway and he knew where all the bodies were buried, so he got 3.2 billion euros in one go, bless him. But he blew quite a lot of it on this system you see here, which is called APS, Alimentation par Sol. He didn't want overhead wires in certain parts of the city. Okay, fine, you can do that. This is a very expensive alternative. It took about 4 years to get it to work properly. You know about electricity and water, they don't like each other. What's ice? Well, it's water, especially when it melts. So this gave them significant problems. So just be careful. There's nothing wrong with overhead wires. And people who say, oh, I can't buy these overhead wires, just remind them that their children are being killed by what they can't see. Exhaust fumes, small particulate matter, PM 2.5 through tyre and brake wear. You can't see any of that, but it kills you. You can see overhead wires, but they are never, ever going to kill you. I know you can jump up and hang on to them, but it's bloody difficult. So in Bordeaux, you've got this crazy case where this is one of the terminals called Quinconce, quite near the city centre. It's beautiful, it's tree-lined, but if you put overhead wires in there, you wouldn't even see them. So don't waste your money when you don't need to. Orléans went to the opposite extreme. This is one of the main streets in Orléans. Again, you can see there's still provision for vans and cars for deliveries, etc. But the trams are the mainstream. They have the 100% priority. Can you see the wires? No. Why? Because 90% they're strung from the buildings. Very, very successful. You have to be brave. Mayors in France have proven to be brave. Ours have yet to prove themselves in many ways. This is Mériadeck, a main street to the west of the centre of Bordeaux. This used to be 4 lanes of traffic, completely clogged all day long. 2 lanes taken away, parking removed. Tram line laid, grass track, brilliant, because trams whiz past queues of cars, and in the end people say, why aren't I on that tram? That's what you have to do. So, in 34 years, France has inaugurated 28 new networks, and there are more under construction. Almost every one of those networks, incidentally, has expanded. Some of them phenomenally so. Phenomenally, 5 and 6 lines. It's on average taken them around 6 years, where we would take a quarter of a century. And so it's very sad that we're just too slow. Interestingly, municipal pride has come back in a big way, and it does. Trams give you your municipal pride back. I challenge you to go to Nice, and I challenge you to buy a postcard that hasn't got a tram on it. Absolutely incredible, everywhere you look. So lessons for the UK, autonomy at local level. We are the most centralised regime outside Belarus, and I used to think they were improving. It is ridiculous, utterly ridiculous that so much is left to HM Treasury or HM Department of Transport. We've made little steps towards autonomy with city regions and powerful mayors, but it's yet to be proven really sound. You've got to get funding streams locally. Versement Transport or similar is very good. Workplace parking levy, which they have in Nottingham. The largest employer in Nottingham is Boots, right on the border between the city and the county. And when they heard about workplace parking levy, they were going to have to pay to invest in the tram. They said they would remove all their car parking across the boundary into the county, where there was no levy, obviously. Well, they never actually got round to it. And they now will tell you they're a big supporter of workplace parking levy because it's enabled them once again to reduce the amount of expensive car parking they provide. Go for it. Revenue support. We have this terrible problem in the UK. Governments of all colours, more or less until today, believe that the user must pay the full cost of public transport, which is utter, complete nonsense. Because the users don't pay the full cost of everything else, certainly not the NHS, that they have. We need to grow up from that. We've got to understand that revenue support is desirable, and it's actually become essential as a result of COVID, and will continue to be essential as we tackle the climate emergency. My good friend Lewis is going to talk you through COVID. I just want very quickly to highlight the things which I think are staggeringly important. Traffic congestion costs local economies big time. It's the biggest single contributor to pollution. We've seen the growth of Uber and private hire vehicle outfits of one kind or other, largely imported from the States. They're never going to make a profit. In the end, they'll go away. We have a massive uplift in deliveries of goods to workplaces. People, I know they're working from home at the moment, but they'll still do it when they go back. They sit in their office on the office computer, they order something and they get it delivered to the office because they're not going to be home for the delivery to come to them. And that's led to a 25% increase in central London in white van traffic. Madness. We have more cities in breach of air quality limits than any other European country. Leaving the EU doesn't change that. The annual target in London generally is exceeded. The whole year's target is exceeded by the middle of January still. Too many diesel-powered vehicles. We were encouraging, Gordon Brown said, don't have a petrol car, don't have a diesel car. Bonkers. We now know and understand the Oslo effect of small particulate emissions. It's no good, even if there was the capacity in the entire world to make the batteries needed to convert Britain's 33 million motor cars into battery cars. You can't do it. So we're going to have to learn to manage our lives without cars. We used to. Rapid electrification of all urban public transport is the only way we're going to get through this. Generation Z. I wake up every morning and think, oh God, I'm in Britain, it's not going to get any better. And then I look to future generations. I firmly believe that in 50 years' time, younger people will be saying, weren't they funny? Our parents and grandparents, they had cars. Yeah, it's going to be such a laugh, isn't it? Like, you remember the advert for Smash where the Martians were giggling at the way we peeled potato to make Smash? Well, Smash is gone, but this won't go. What young people want is a box. They want one of these. They don't need a box on wheels, they need a box like this, and they're connected to everything. And they want the response to be instant. And they don't want to have to faff around with 3 different sets of fares for using a bus, a train and a ferry and a tram. They want it there and they want to give one place. And we can see that happening, and that's a massive, massive signature for the future. So I think we can significantly move the way that we depend so much on cars. Above all, Generation Z and what follows are willing to make sacrifices in a way that maybe, understandably perhaps, our parents and our grandparents weren't, because they'd lived through 2 world wars. Finally, Tale of Two Cities. This really shows you how it can be done. Freiburg and York, more or less the same size. Public transport use in Freiburg, 31%, York 8%. Cars, 21% Freiburg, and falling. York car use 52%, and I think still growing. Can we afford a tram system? And this is my favourite. Just remember, the bitterness of poor quality is rarely exceeded by the sweetness of low price. Marry in haste, repent at leisure. HM Treasury has for years been reluctant to put any money into tramways because they say buses are cheaper. They know, I know, you can buy a bus for 200 to 250 grand. And it'll cost you 1.8 to 2.5 million for a tram. That is not the point. Whole life costs. The average passenger to staff ratio on tramways is something like 1 member of staff to 140. The average on bus systems is 1 member of staff to about 60. So it's the drivers that cost you the money. I've spent years saying that in the public transport business. I think Bill Clinton copied me with his piece about it's the economy stupid, because I was always saying it's the drivers stupid. If you can reduce the number of drivers, why did we have articulated buses in London? Not to knock Boris off his bike, a popular misconception, but to save money and provide a better quality of service. Boris wanted rid of them, so they've gone. The crazy thing now is we're looking, staring in the face, the climate crisis. We've got Bus Back Better, the great campaign of Boris, who says he loves buses and he's willing to commit 3 billion, but he's still talking about spending 27.5 billion on roads. Sorry, that's completely the wrong way round. Maybe we'll learn that. Besançon, small town in France, thought it couldn't afford a tramway, went for it, did it. It's a population, I've discovered from Googling it, pretty well similar to Thurrock. 23-metre long trams are now having to be extended because it's been such a success, and their long-term plan has them extended again because it will go on being a success. It's about 16 million a kilometre. We should be looking at that as the marker price. Bear in mind you're going to have a tunnel that will cost a lot more, I accept that, and so on.